Hey there troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and I've recently been pretty busy getting back into university, but I'm finally back with some regular videos and we're more than ready to go. And something I want to discuss today is something that I feel has been plaguing the Battlefield franchise for quite a while now, and that is the identity crisis. Now, for those of you who've been with Battlefield for a long time now, have seen iterations of the game that are drastically different from one another, and encapsulates a lot of different audiences. It's a game that attracts hardcore shooter fans, casual fans, fans that aren't really that big on video games in general, are just looking for a sort of cinematic style experience, and almost everything in between. I think it's a big enough franchise now that most people know about it, and most people have at least dabbled in it at some point. And I think Battlefield 5 has very much become a focus of an identity crisis, and I think this has stemmed from previous iterations of the game weighing too heavily on what the future of Battlefield should be, and also some players perhaps not understanding how gaming as a whole is evolving in lots of different directions. So where does this all begin, and what has exactly started this identity crisis for Battlefield 5? Well, you only really need to look online to see what people are saying. Some people are saying it's too hardcore, some people are saying it's too easy, some people are saying the maps are too small, some people are saying they're too big, some people are saying the gunplay is great, some people are saying the gunplay is bad. And it ultimately puts the game in a very weird position. I think the weird thing for it is that Battlefield 1 was ultimately a not very Battlefield title in comparison to the rest, but because it attracted such a newer audience and people who had never played the game before, and was one of the most successful Battlefields in recent history, it's confused a lot of people that the direction that Battlefield 5 is heading in now is very different from Battlefield 1. Now, I know a lot of this is subjective in some degree, but on an objective basis, Battlefield 1 was much more focused on the war feeling of Battlefield as opposed to the sort of core gameplay mechanics. It was very chaotic, you died a lot, there wasn't much to the gunplay depth, there wasn't much to the movement depth. It was more a case of, you know, a system whereby you would be put in a chaotic war-based environment, and sometimes if you were a good player, that didn't necessarily always make a difference, because there was a good chance you'd get killed by something random like an explosion, grenade, a tank, anything in between really. Now, if you flash forward to Battlefield 5, this is much more a closer step to Battlefield 3 and 4, and arguably in some respects Bad Company 2 as well. It's focusing on much tighter gunplay that's more consistent and recognizable, and I think you can see, especially from the maps as well, that it's looking for a map system that's much less chaotic and has specified lanes. You only have to look at how frequently players travel from Objective A to Objective B, or vice versa, to see that there are specific lanes in the game. Some of my favourite including the top objectives at Rotterdam, where people would be crossing over the large stretch of land with this big open road, and it really changed up the gameplay dynamic. Some parts of it were very much tight and in corners, other parts were in big open spaces, but there were evident lanes that players would use to get from certain objectives, and that meant it was predictable, and if you were a good player, you knew what the map was like and you knew how players moved through it, and because you knew all of those things, you could likely outperform other guys. And I think this is a system that I personally prefer, but it's why Battlefield is finding itself in this very weird position. And to add an almost third layer of dimension to this, there's the old school vets, the people who played Battlefield in the very early days, like Battlefield 2, who remember the game being something extremely different. Battlefield 2 was a very unforgiving team-based game. One of those games where it's almost like Squad, it's almost like Postscriptum. It was effectively the beginning of games like Project Reality, which were mods of Battlefield 2 back in the day. It was a game that was much more larger scale, had a more militaristic feel to it, a more realistic feel to it, and didn't have the sort of gameplay mechanics that Battlefield has today, which is of course much more fast-paced and more importantly, much more accessible as well. Now, I'm not saying that any of these given directions are perfect. I personally prefer Battlefield 3 and 4. I personally believe that 5 is taking steps towards that game, which I appreciate, but I can understand why people enjoyed Battlefield 1 and why people enjoyed Battlefield 1942 and why people enjoyed Battlefield 2, for example. The older games in particular are reasons that I play games like Squad now, which are much more hardcore shooters. But I think the problem we have at the moment is that these three groups of players who are all from very different eras are convening on one game, which is trying its best to almost try and appeal to all of them. It's got the sort of competitive nature of Battlefield 3 and 4 for some of the players who played around then. It's got the war experience and the war feel and how good it looks for the players of Battlefield 1. And I think it's trying to be more team-based and take back some fans from the early days of 1942 and Battlefield 2 as well, and encourage a certain play and a certain dynamic that has made Battlefield special for many a year now. But the problem is that if it pulls in one direction too heavily, it alienates the others, and if it doesn't pull too heavily in another direction, it alienates the other directions. If they try to be more like Battlefield 3, people in Battlefield 1 feel like they're not part of the fold anymore and they don't understand what's happening. If they try to be too much like the old school games like Battlefield 2, it very much alienates a wider cross-section of audience. And I think it's why we have this big identity crisis today. And I guess I kind of want to offer a solution for the game, in my opinion. Now, even though as somebody who has enjoyed the older games, I think we need to leave the nostalgia of Battlefield 2 and previous iterations in the past, because that's now a very separate genre to what Battlefield is now. In the past, the games were much more hardcore and they resembled things like squad and post-scriptum that we have today, and unfortunately, in my opinion, that is a direction that only appeals to a very small amount of players. I love that kind of team play and that kind of dynamic, but I am also totally aware that that sort of gameplay and that sort of gameplay style is not something that attracts a lot of players these days, and the faster paced games most certainly do. I also feel that it needs to kind of get away from Battlefield 1. As much as it was a successful time, it's a game that wasn't representative of the franchise. It didn't have much team play involved, it didn't have much tightness of core gameplay dynamics, and even though it was successful, doesn't necessarily entail that the game itself at its core was fundamentally enjoyable. It just meant that it looked good enough for a lot of people to buy it. And I think Battlefield just really needs to head in its own direction. It needs to reclaim some of its older features, like team play, a bit more extensively, but just do something new. There's no harm in doing that, and we've seen franchise reiterate themselves time upon time again, and I think Battlefield definitely should be going for this, and although it's moved closer to Battlefield 3 and 4, I'm perfectly fine with the franchise heading in all kinds of different directions, both in terms of where it's taking place, and in terms of what it's hoping to accomplish in core gameplay dynamic. It's okay to be true to the franchise in some respects, and it's okay to remember what makes Battlefield special, especially in terms of things like squad play and team play. But in my opinion, we live in a game age now where there are too many franchises doing too many of the same things. There are games that feel as though they're just churned out and don't really accomplish anything special, and I think Battlefield has always had this feeling of being a real visceral, team-based, cinematic style experience that a lot of us have always loved, the kind of only in Battlefield moments, the kind of team play moments that you don't really get anywhere else. And I think that core component needs to stay. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the shooter market now is just... there is nothing new. Everything is the same. Even games like Titanfall, which was supposed to be dynamic and game-changing, feel very samey now to games that we've seen before. And I think if Battlefield's trying to achieve an experience that's a fast-paced team play gameplay that just is tight as hell, then I say they go for it, and I say they just hammer away at what they think they're doing well, and see where it ends up. It might not be the perfect formula, but we've learnt time and time again from every iteration of Battlefield that there really is no perfect formula. It's more about finding something new, and I think that's fine. I think as much as the gameplay designers do listen to us a lot, because they do on Reddit and all sorts of places, and as somebody who's an EA game changer, they take a lot of what we have to say to heart. I think in terms of just the scope of the game and what they want to accomplish, they kind of just need to look at it themselves and see what they think would be really cool to play. Because at the end of the day, most developers are gamers like ourselves, and if they make something shit hot and fun, then it'll be something they want to play as much as we want to play. So troops, that's about it for this video today. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon in another video.